Our next speaker is Bader Qarmout. Bader is an American of Jordanian descent. He was born in Jordan to Christian parents, and as you can imagine, being a Christian in an Arab country, not quite that easy. Bader's entire family, his parents and 9 kids, immigrated to the United States in the mid-1970s. Bader's father and older brother initially worked at a plastics factory in Mar12. Growing up in a working-class family that was founded in Christian principles established the framework for Bader's life. After years of hard work and pooling their money together, the family bought their first home in Patterson. A few years later, the family rented a store in Riverdale and then moved over to Pompton Lakes. And the Qarmouts eventually owned and operated a convenience store, and before long had several locations. They did it the old-fashioned way. They worked their butts off for it. By the example set by his father and his brothers, Bader learned to appreciate the benefits of hard work and believes that hard work is the only honest way to upward mobility. He also learned that there are no shortcuts to success. As a youngster, Bader worked after school and on the weekends at the family business. And growing up in a working-class family that was founded in Christian principles established the framework for his life. Bader received his bachelor's in psychology with a minor in political science from the University of Hawaii in 1991. And he later received a degree in social work with a drug counseling minor from Rutgers in 1993. After his dad passed away in 1995, he bought the family business in order to keep it going and to keep it in the family. In 2009, he sold it to his brothers so that he could work towards his doctorate degree. Bader has always been interested in politics, but just like us, the last few years have led him to feel so frustrated and so angry at what he sees happening to the country that he loves, that he said, you know, the America that my parents gave me, I am no longer able to pass down to my children. And that wasn't good. So it gave him the realization and the motivation to get off the couch, but actually to run. According to Bader, we must reclaim our country and return it to the founding principles. Tonight, Bader will discuss the history of Islam and Sharia law, and whether or not Sharia law can coexist with democracy. After the question and answer period, he'll discuss why he's running for the Republican nomination to challenge and defeat one of the most liberal senators in the United States Senate, Robert Menendez, this November, so that we can say from New Jersey, we have a conservative, real conservative senator from the state of New Jersey. Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure to introduce Bader Qarmout.
Well, good evening. Let me start off with a question. Do you mind? Could Sharia or Islam, and I'll differentiate in a minute, and the Constitution coexist in America?
No.
Raise your hand if you think the answer is yes. Anybody? I'm assuming everybody else is no. How about who's not sure? Anyone not sure? We're all definite no's? Okay, that is the right answer. So you guys pass your now you can go home. Now that we got the answer, let's go back to the beginning and talk about the history of Islam. What was before Islam, and what Sharia is, and where we go from there. Some of you have seen the rock, the Aqaba in the Mecca city, the big rock that they go circling around. We all believe that that was started with Islam. We all believe, according to Islam, that that was a white rock that fell from the sky and absorbed all the sin of the world and it turned black by the time it reached the earth. True or false? False. Sometimes I feel it's absolutely false. There was a big tent at one time, before even Muhammad was born. A big tent in the spot where the rock is now. And inside that tent was about 360 idols. And Saudi Arabia was a place where people would, with the caravans, pass through. And they would leave an idol, so next time they passed through, they could stop and worship. And that area became a safe haven for various groups of various religions. There was never any fighting between those groups, and if there was ever any disputes, when they came near that area, everything was put aside because that was considered a holy site for all the different religions because they all had their idols inside that big tent. You with me so far? Muhammad came around, he was born into that type of a world. It existed before Muhammad. Muhammad realized that you had to pay a tax to the royal family that owned and operated that land. And he felt that that was wrong. No one should have to pay a tax in order to pray. So that was the very beginning of Muhammad's thinking, of his early rule, his early books that were written. They were known as early Meccan books. Those are the early books of Islam, early Meccan books. Why religion should not be something you pay for, why it should be something for free, and it should be something that we all have access to be able to do. But he got a little more popular, and the royal family realized this man is convincing people not to pay them. So they drove him out of Mecca into a little north, into a town called, anybody know?
Medina.
Medina. Hey, I'm in the right crowd. Into Medina. In Medina, he became a little more popular, and he became somewhat of a celebrity, someone who not only settled disputes between individuals, but was also seen as someone who was an elderly, wise man, but yet also as a military leader. So for about 10 years, while in Medina, he was bringing forces together to go back and lead a revolution against the royal family of Mecca. The second time around, second time for him was the charmer, not the first time. He was defeated in his first attempt. Second attempt, he attempted to take over Mecca. He was successful, and he was able to take over control of Mecca, and they gave him control. While he was in Mecca, he wrote the third phase. First phase, known as the early Meccan. When he went to Medina, he wrote the Medina Suhras, and which was all books about war, all the books that you may be familiar with, various passages about fighting and killing the enemy and taking over and all of that. All those were written in Medina, known as the Medina Suhras. And then when he took over Mecca, the third stage of Islam writing, also known as late Meccan Suhras. Now he changes the angle of Islam. Now he only lived for 2 years in Mecca after he took it over. He only lived for 2 years. He died in the year, I believe it was 632, of high fever illness. So he didn't. He died at the age of 63, if I remember correctly, in his 62 or 63 years old of high fever. So Islam was not something that suddenly existed that was never before. It actually adapted things that were in its environment. Anyone know what the symbol of Islam is? That crescent. Sometimes you see it with the star. Well, anyone know where that came from? Ooh. We're gonna learn something.
The original moon god.
That's right. The original moon god of the Ottoman Empire. When the Muslim Empire conquered most of that Middle East area, they kept the symbol of the Ottoman Empire, which was the crescent moon with the star. Sometimes you see it with the star, sometimes you see it without. And the green flag is the original flag of Islam because it was meant to be a sign of life, you know, a spring, the sign of life. So how big is Islam worldwide? Anyone have an idea?
1 billion.
1 point what?
3.
Yeah. A little over 1 billion. Anybody know? Well, there's 2 types of Islam, right? You all often hear them, but sometimes I'm not sure what the difference. One is a Sunni, one is a Shiite. The Sunni and the Shiite. Let's explain what the differences are. Is that all right? There's 2 types. The Sunni are 85% of Muslims around the world. The Shiites are about 15% of the Muslims of the world. The Shiites are primarily found in Iran and Iraq, and a couple of isolated places in Syria, a little bit in Lebanon, a tiny bit in Jordan, but generally those 2 major countries. The Sunnis are found almost everywhere else in the Muslim world. The difference between them really derives from when their prophet Muhammad, notice I said their prophet, not yours or mine perhaps, but their prophet Muhammad, when he died, that began the split between the Sunnis and the Shiites. They wanted to know, well, now that Muhammad is dead, who's going to come next? The Sunnis believe that the person who comes after Muhammad should be someone we elect, someone that we trust and bestow the position upon. The Shiite believe, no, it should be someone from Muhammad's bloodline, a son-in-law, as a matter of fact, is who they wanted. And that was the beginning of the split between the 2 groups. It was political, not religious in the beginning. It was political, not religious. And that's an important point because I'm going to come back to the political/religious aspects of Islam in a little bit. And then the Sunnis killed the son-in-law of Muhammad. And the Shiites at that time did not seek revenge for the killing of their leader. Until this day, they still have a ceremony where the Shiites, the followers of the Shiites, actually still punish themselves for not seeking revenge. You ever seen anything on TV where they whip themselves? Anybody know? That's what that really comes back to. The point where they did not seek revenge for the killing of their leader, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, who was the very first of the Shiite offspring side. So they still punish themselves for it. The difference really is the idea that the Shiite is someone who is a leader by birthright, and the Sunni believe it is a leader by election, by a sense of who we trust to lead us, not someone who was born into a position. I hope that helped to clarify the Shiite versus Sunni aspect. As much as the Muslim extremists / Muslim in general may have some resentment to the West, to Christians and Jews, they also have an equal amount of resentment, Shiites towards Sunnis. If you look at the history of how many have been killed by terrorism, Muslim versus non-Muslim, you'll find that Muslims have killed more Muslims than non-Muslims over the years. So they hate each other quite a bit, and they hate us too. So there's no shortage of hate. Plenty of hate. I think they bottled it over there. I'm not exactly sure.
Sort of like equal rights.
Equal right discrimination. Okay. Yeah, I guess they hate us all just the same. Now, as far as the population of Islam, is it growing, or do you think it's fairly stable and steady? It's growing. Why do you think it's growing?
Population. Birth.
A high birth rate in the Muslim families. Very well. That's I can contribute to. Yeah, 4 wives will help in a lot of ways. Sorry. You find that they have a very high birth rate in the Muslim countries. Europe is. If you look at the statistics of Europe, how many people in Europe are actually of original European descent versus how many are of Muslim descent, you'll find that the Muslim population is outgrowing the European population. In order for a country to replace its population, you need a ratio of 1. In Europe, if you remove the Muslims from the equation, it's 0.7. So the European population is unable to replace itself. Is this making sense, or am I boring you? If I'm boring you, raise your hand and yawn. Then I'll get the hint. Okay, so the Muslim population in Europe, when they're included in that equation, it goes from 0.7 to 1.2. Now they not only make up the gap, but they also go over the amount that is needed. That's not a rarity. Let's look at the United States. The United States population, we need 1 in order to replace our population, the number of births. So, from the numbers of deaths, 1 means it's an equal swap. If it's below 1, we're losing population. If it's over 1, we're gaining. The United States is about 0.6. Until you include foreign, Latino, and others into the mix. And now you're up to 1.1. So the Latino population we see in the United States is growing at a very fast pace in the U.S. because they have a much larger number of offspring than non-Latinos in the United States. And worldwide, they're expecting the number of Muslims by 2030 to be 2.2 billion. That's worldwide, not just the United States. Right now, it's about 1.7 billion. They're expecting it to reach 2.2 billion by 2030. It's not by mistake. It's not by mistake. It's actually, like I think it was mentioned earlier, it is by design. It is by design in order to slowly, gradually, systematically, 1 inch at a time, conquer and change from within. It's the easiest way to take over a country when you just slowly come on through the door. You don't even have to jump in through the window. Just slowly come through the door and slowly take over. Before you know it, you're able to gain power through the education, through politics, and now you have control of that society. The Dutch. You may have seen in the last year or so they're having their issues with Muslim Sharia law in the Dutch. There was a member of the Dutch Parliament by the name of Geert Wilder. Anyone familiar with? Yeah. Okay. Geert Wilder, he actually was being sued by many Muslim organizations and was on trial by his own government as being anti-Muslim and a Muslimophobe, and was about to be kicked out of office. They had a trial for him and he was cleared. But he said, in a warning to the United States, he said, "Wake up, America. This is what you need to do." And I have 9 points of what he recommended we in the United States do. He said, stop cultural relativism, meaning stop allowing these different pockets of different people. We must demand assimilation. My parents came to this country, like I was introduced by Denise earlier. When my parents came to this country, we had to learn English. My dad spoke it with an accent, don't get me wrong. My mom still speaks it with an accent. And often I have to translate certain words. And I remember when I was in elementary school at a parent-teacher conference, my dad came with me. The teacher was telling me what a bad boy I am, and I had to tell my dad. And my dad is telling me to tell the teacher that it's okay, tell her she can hit you. So Dad, I can't do it. Tell her. He made me tell her. Miss, my dad says you can hit me. So imagine that. I was right there in the middle of it. But nonetheless, Mr. Wilder recommends assimilation as opposed to pluralist societies. He also wants to highlight the fact that Islam is not just a religion, it is a political system. That's a huge difference. It's a major point, because we talk about religious freedom, right? And that's how it gets through the door. Hey, this is religious freedom. The Constitution, the First Amendment says we have the right to practice, etc. But Islam is not just a religion. It is a political system. Therefore, it's a whole different ballgame now. When looking at Islam as a political system, not as a religion, then different rules come into play. It is a totalitarian system, similar to that of, let's say, fascism. Similar to that as communism, where there's total dictatorship from the top down, and the people do not have a choice but to follow or be punished. So he talks about a sense of controlling immigration from Muslim nations. He argues that we need to make it a process by which they must sign some sort of an allegiance to the host nation upon entering the country. He recommends that we also stop building more mosques. He suggests that we close all madrasas. What is that? Schools. I'm with the right crowd. He recommends that we close madrasas, and his biggest recommendation, he says, get rid of weak leaders. Get rid of cowards. Remove the spineless from among you. He recommends a total change from a form of government that just gets along to get along type of a mentality to a government that is willing to take a stand. He reminded us, at the end of his warning, he reminded us of a very important reason that we need to be very careful. Any veterans in the room? Okay. This is especially for our veterans. He says, remember, American soldiers did not die for a Muslim Europe. They died for a free Europe. Remember, American soldiers did not die for a Muslim Europe. They died for a free Europe, and not to let their death be in vain. I found that to be very, very powerful and very important. So what is Sharia? Is there a difference between Sharia and Islam?
No.
We're not sure. Hey, you guys are not shaking your head yes or no, so you're not sure of this. The right answer is no. Sharia is Islam, Islam is Sharia. Could you have Sharia without Islam? No. Could you have Islam without Sharia? No. They're one in the same. So, what is Sharia? Sharia is a set of Muslim law of how every Muslim is to behave and what to do. It is broken down into 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, or 12. We'll find out when we go through that. The very first step, important rule of Sharia, is purification. Sharia right dictates to its followers how to wash up, how to clean themselves, their home, their body, their food, their clothes, everything. And some Muslims actually find it that it dictates when they touch another non-Muslim, they are to go home and be purified. That's how dirty non-Muslims could be interpreted in the eyes of Islam. It also talks about prayer, known as salat, S-A-L-A-T. It says it must be done 5 times a day. But before prayer, you must also purify. You must also clean. And you must be facing the Kaaba, that black rock that I was talking about earlier. When Muhammad returned to Mecca, he got rid of all those idols that were inside the rock, and only Allah is left in that spot. Sharia also dictates rules on funeral prayer, known as janazah. And that is the person, when they die, they must be buried within 24 hours. They cannot have any of their liquids or bodily fluids removed or anything. They must be buried as is. They must be buried in the ground. And they have to be perpendicular to Mecca. When they bury, they must be buried on their side, facing Mecca.
I thought they were supposed to be buried at sea. That's what we've been told.
That's only compliments of the USA, my friend. Sharia also dictates taxes. And this is another very important point. I think it often goes unnoticed. Taxes or any sort of goodwill giving is called zakat, Z-A-K-A-T. Several ways to pay your taxes. One could be to your government. And general rule of thumb with Islam Sharia law is 2.5% of the value of everything net worth you own. If you own a house that's worth $350, you only owe $200, so you have $150,000 in profit in that home equity, 2.5% of that. You own a car that's paid off, it's worth $10,000, 2.5% of that. You own shares, everything you own that's a net profit, 2.5%. You give every year. Just because you gave 2.5% last year doesn't mean you don't. Every year you give 2.5%. You can give it to the government or you can give it to charitable organizations. One thing that is allowed, and this is how Islam is growing. She was mentioning Detroit and other places around the world. Well, this is where zakat comes into play. Zakat comes into play. You're allowed, according to Islam Sharia law, to give money to the poor to convert them to Islam. Did that just make sense? So if you're poor and needy, I'll help you I'll pay your electric bill this month. Oh, you need help with the rent? I'll help you out. Come with me. And ever so slowly, we'll build that relationship of me giving you financial assistance and slowly to convert you to Islam. So Islam growing in Africa and the poor cities of the United States and in prisons is an intentional plan that fits perfectly with Sharia law. Did that just make sense? Yes. Another thing Islam dictates is fasting, Siyam, S-Y-I-M. It's done in the month of Ramadan, which is often somewhere between, for this year it's in July 20th to August 18th. It's for 30 days, no eat or drink or sex from sunrise to sunset. I can live without 2, I'll come up the 3rd. Food, what do you guys think? Nonetheless, the Quran said for a week. Then why do they do it for 30 days? Because they're not sure which week. That's the truth. So just to be on the safe side, they'll take all 4 weeks of the month to make sure it's covered. That they're not fasting in the wrong week of the month. So to be safe, they do it all month. Now, for non-believers to be in a Muslim country, you'll have a very hard time getting a meal unless you're in a high tourist area. But if you're in a regular town, you'll have a hard time getting a meal, getting anything, because most of those places will close and not available to you if you're ready. But after sunset, it's a huge festive environment. Parties, music, desserts, candy handed out every evening until the next morning. Once a year, they have to also go to, it's called a Hajj, H-A-J-J, where once in a lifetime, it's expected of you to go to Mecca and go around that rock in the same exact format that they used to do before Islam was even born. That same tradition is still carried. They thought they made it up, but that tradition has actually been around before Islam. So they go around that, they spend the night in the desert, they come back the next morning, they throw stones at 3 statues to represent demons in the world, and that's their practice. They have to do it at least once a lifetime. The person who does this, they are called Hajj or Hajjeh for a female. and they're often highly respected in the community. It's usually an older person once they reach that stage. Sharia law also dictates trade, how trade is to be done, business, and there was a question earlier about Sharia banking, of which I'll talk about ever so briefly. Unfortunately, within 20 minutes, you can spend months on this stuff. According to Sharia, you cannot charge interest when banking with someone. You cannot make profit on someone who's also a Muslim, by the way. From one Muslim to another, you cannot charge interest or make profit. So what is Sharia banking? Should we worry about Sharia banking?
Yes.
Absolutely. Why should we worry about Sharia banking? Because it is the way to get Sharia in the United States. Remember that the quiet, nonchalant entrance? That's exactly what Sharia banking is. It's a slow, quiet, almost unnoticeable, nonchalant entrance into American society. How do we know this? Because that's exactly what happened to England. And in a minute, I'm going to read you something that happened also in Australia. So in England, Sharia banking was on the books. And when people found out that they were going to implement Sharia law, they got up in arms. And the argument was, what are you worried about? We had Sharia banking for the last 10 years in England. Oh, did we? Oh, I guess it's not a big deal then. And that's the idea here, is to bring it in, have it on the books, have Sharia already in practice for X number of years, and then slowly begin to bring it into Sharia family court, especially family court. That's really where it has its teeth. And then to argue, well, look, we already had Sharia law, it's not like there's anything new. Sharia banking, what do you think the Catholic Church stands on Sharia banking? For it or against it?
Against it.
Raise your hand if you think the Vatican is against it. Raise your hand if you think Vatican is for it. What if you're not sure? Raise your hand if you're not sure. Who cares, right? Let's find out. The Vatican says the principles of Islamic finance may represent a possible cure for ailing markets.
And sex with little boys, too.
Oh, I didn't go there. Let me repeat that again. The Vatican believe that Sharia law, the principles of Islamic finance, may represent a possible cure for ailing markets. This is an opportunity for Americans, Catholic or non-Catholic, to write, to let the clergy and higher-ups, the cardinals, etc., let them know what you think of the Muslim Sharia banking. The quote, yes ma'am. The principles of Islamic finance may represent a possible cure for ailing markets. Yes, sir.
Statement name.
I believe it was in the last 2 years, but I don't have an exact date. But within the last 2 years. Sharia also talks about inheritance. I'm sure you already know this, but the value of a female is 50% of a male. Is that true? According to Sharia law, it's true. So when a father dies or whatever, the daughter gets half of what the male gets. According to Sharia, that is acceptable and it is perfectly fine. Marriage, also known as Jizza, J-A-Z-Z-A, a man is allowed to have up to 4 wives simultaneously. Imagine a credit card for each.
One's enough.
No, it's welfare each.
Yes.
Is having, quote, temporary marriages something that's in Sharia, or is that just...
I'm going to get to that one. Yeah. You're good. You're allowed to marry and divorce up to 40 wives.
They encourage it.
And according to Islam, if you tell your wife, I divorce you, 3 times, the 3rd time you said it, she's divorced. And if you're really pissed, if she really gets you mad, you can say, I divorce you 3 times. In one statement, that's it. You're legally divorced. You're no longer responsible for that woman. Is that true, or did I just make that up?
Does she get into alimony?
It depends on the causes, yeah. They are entitled to child support and alimony. They're entitled to child support up until the child is 7 years old. 7. And then the child can choose who to live with. If the child chooses to come to dad, no more child support. If the child chooses to go to mom, no more child support. So I guess it doesn't matter what they choose. But then they can choose where to live. What else? Okay, as far as the duration of time. Well, I did say the man is allowed 4 wives. How many husbands is a woman allowed? One. Another key difference. A man is allowed to marry a Muslim woman. He's allowed to marry a Christian woman. He's allowed to marry a Jewish woman. Anyone of the book, and I'm putting the words of the book in quotes. Anyone, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, a man is allowed to marry. But a woman is only allowed one husband, and that one husband must be a Muslim. Am I making sense? Okay. Also, the duration of time. You could enter into a contract in Sunni, not Shia, which is 85% of Muslims. In the Sunni sect of Islam, you're allowed to enter into a contracted period of marriage. You know, till death do us part. You could have it until a year do us part. You could have it until a 1 hour do us part. Are you getting what I'm talking about here? Yeah. Prostitution could be allowed if it's a contracted marriage for 1 hour, compensation paid for the marriage, deal is done, out the door he goes. And still within the laws of Islam.
Would that count to as 40 though?
Maybe.
And this is all written in the Quran.
Yes, sir.
Who drafted the Quran?
The Quran is believed to be devised by 2 methods. One, by the writing of the Prophet Muhammad, where he gave verbal history, and after his death, his immediate circle of followers wrote it down. And the other aspect of Islam is through observation of the behavior of the Prophet, their Prophet Muhammad.
The whole thing is really a bogus religion.
It is. It is a political system / religion. It's not just religion; it's political as well.
What's the significance of the different scarves or kerchiefs they wear?
Depending on what country they come
gray.
from. Yeah, depending on the country. Sometimes they symbolize tribes in different regions.
I mean, is it a Shiite wears gray and...
more so country than color, than country. Country more than the Shiite or Sunni. Depending on what country. Palestinians have a different color than Jordanians, for example.
Yeah, because I mean, he had, let's see, Arafat always had a gray one.
Mm-hmm.
No, he had a checkercloth. I used to think that was like Italian tablecloth. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that's how I remember it.
I'm sure the Italians don't mind.
Yeah, but I mean, anyway, he always wore a red one, so.
Yeah.
Can you give your comments on Saudi Arabia, slavery and alcohol, and and also like 2 blocks of Citibank's office was Chop Chop Day every Friday at 3 o'clock. They had public dismemberment. Is that still today?
Yeah, Saudi Arabia practices an extreme form of Islam. It's not all over the Muslim world. Saudi Arabia is more strict than any other Muslim nation. They still have cutting off of limbs for stealing and things of such, public displays. It is intended not to be, some Muslims look at it as necessary in order to deter criminal, unethical, immoral behavior. Islam, the law is not just written as a law to keep people in line, but rather Islam believes that the law is written as a dictate from God. It is you're violating God's law, not just man's law. So it's a lot higher, quote-unquote, calling. Do they still do it? Yes. Alcohol is still forbidden, and that's one of the very major forbiddens of Islam. Alcohol is still absolutely forbidden. Also, if a girl loses her virginity before marriage, her family can and must stone her or kill her in order to regain their family honor. That's still being practiced. In Jordan, there was such a case, and the father went to jail. Can anybody guess roughly how long he spent in jail?
10 minutes?
No.
6 months.
5 minutes?
3 months. 3 months in jail.
Killing his daughter.
For killing his daughter. And while he was in jail, he did not have a hard time of jail because people saw what he did, he had to do. You know, he was almost, not a celebrity, but it was understood. He did what he had to do to regain the family's honor. Sir?
Yeah, Peter, you've given a lot of examples of how under Islam, there's no way that a Muslim can treat a non-Muslim as an equal, right?
Correct.
That's pretty much.
Yes.
So our government is founded upon equality under all circumstances. So it appears to me that Muslims shouldn't even be allowed to live in the United States. It's anti-constitutional. How could that be reconciled?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to start off with the question, can Islam and democracy coexist? The answer is no. A Muslim could live in the U.S., but Islam itself cannot. Islam itself cannot coexist, because what we find that even through their justice system, which is the next point, the justice system of Muslim law, if you have a witness and that witness is a Muslim, his word is taken over the witness of a non-Muslim. That's within the law. That if you as a female say that you were raped, you need 4 witnesses to verify. Men witnesses to verify that you were raped. And if one non-Muslim comes along and says something, and another Muslim says something the opposite, the words of the Muslim are superseding the words of a non-Muslim. So the legal system is absolutely not compliant with the Constitution.
So to the extent that we still have a Constitution, which is very minimal, that belief, which is anti-constitutional, is completely antithetical. I mean, it cannot coexist.
Without a doubt, they cannot go together.
So,
Absolutely, no. There's no mixing of those words. They absolutely cannot go together.
there is no peaceful coexistence.
No, unless you so water it down that Islam is not the legal aspect anymore, and the Sharia law of Islam is not what it is. Islam, in order to exist in the constitutional setting as ours, Islam has to be either completely watered down or the Constitution completely watered down, and that's possibly why we're seeing the Constitution being watered down. Yes, sir.
Comment. I've read the Quran. I know what's in the Hadith. I've never read the Hadith itself. But now we have a lot of people who are considered to be moderate Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
They're not extremists. They want to live just like we do.
Mm-hmm.
The thing which I can't understand is, if they know what's in the Hadith, if they know what Muhammad did and said, if they know what the Quran actually says, how can they maintain that this is a peaceful, moderate religion? Is it that they don't know?
I think they've been, how do I say this politely? I mean, you must understand I'm running for U.S. Senate. But I also want to be accurate in my representation. They have been taught one story for so long that they believe it completely, that Islam is a religion of peace, and anything contradictory is not accepted as fact.
But how do they square it with what's in the Hadith and what's in the Quran? How do they do it?
I don't think they actually do it. They just make believe or look the other way or dismiss it.
Well then.
Yeah.
Well then, do you contend that they and we must decide?
Decide?
Decide this day what they will follow, what they will support and defend.
If I understand your question, you're saying there comes a point of reckoning where we have to make a decision whether Sharia or whether Constitution. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. James Russell Lowell.
Yeah. I think we're getting to that point only because we see what's happened in England and we see what's happened in Australia. In Australia, we find that Sharia is also growing and growing quite rapidly. Let me read you a quote from an Australian-born gentleman by the name of Sadiq Conlon. He formed something called Sharia for Australia. And he says, one day Australia will live under Sharia. It's inevitable, he said. If they, Australians, don't accept it, that's not our problem. We hope, and our objective is to have a peaceful transition, but when you look at history, that's not always the case. There's always been a fight. It's inevitable that one day there will be a struggle for Islam in Australia. Sadiq started Sharia for Australia with 3 main objectives. First, to persuade Muslims that they must hate the worshipping of any god other than Allah, which includes democracy. And 2, his objective to advise them to notify their elected representatives to accept Sharia or be replaced. And 3, educate non-Muslims on the benefits of Sharia, including punishing and stoning adulterers and severing hands of thieves. So according to this gentleman in Australia, the goal is very similar to what we saw in the UK, that we see also happening in the US. Sharia is being projected ever so slowly, but ever so certainly. It's not something that we could assume is not happening.
So, I have read some things on the internet that both prime ministers, and I can't remember the names, the last one was a man, and I think it's a woman now. I thought that what I had read was that they had said to the Muslims, if you don't want to assimilate and you don't like the way it is here, get out. But it sounds like that's not...
Yeah, the thing with democracies, such as the United States, we have, and proud of it, the Constitution. And because we have the Constitution, which has the First Amendment, it does give them the freedom of religion. And as long as Islam is still classified as the religion, then they have that First Amendment that we hold dear. Also, they're willing to utilize as their defense and cover blanket. But we need to, according to Wilder, realize that it's not a religion per se, it's a political system, not just a religion. Jeff, you had your hand up earlier?
I was going to address the gentleman over here. His answer, or his question, so to speak, was how do Muslims in this country who may be moderates jive that with the Quran? And I would say, you know, many of us in this room, I believe, are Christians. And there's obviously many of us who call themselves Christians who may not believe everything in the Bible, or believe that if they're just good enough, they'll be able to get to heaven. And that doesn't jive with the scriptures either. Yeah. So in the same light.
They rationalize aspects of it, accept some, and reject other parts. Yes, ma'am.
How is it possible that we are allowing all these training camps? Please don't photograph me.
I'm not very familiar with, I haven't done much research on all these training
How
camps.
is it that we allow that? Keep on going on. I know there's one up upstate New York called Islam.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah, I've heard of it, I'm familiar, but I haven't researched it extensively myself. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not denying its existence. I haven't researched it enough to give an opinion on it.
Yeah, I just would like to comment on the training facility in the lower Catskill area of New York. I've seen it, and I've spoken to people around there, and it's there, and it exists, and it's...
Why does it exist? And what does the local authorities or anything, anybody have a...
I know that there are people who are somewhat affiliated with this group who were actually in law enforcement who said that they've been on raids there in the past and stuff, but it's for real. And what was most disconcerting is that about a mile from the facility, you go down a steep hill, and what you find at the bottom of the hill is the New York City reservoir system, which I thought was troubling.
Definitely reasons to be worried. I'll go to the gentleman right back there.
You keep saying that because of our Constitution, there's nothing that can be done. But no need for that. Sit down. The oath I took was to defend the United States against enemies from without and within, foreign and domestic.
That's right.
So whoever the hell they are, it doesn't matter under what guise that they're trying to destroy the United States by destroying the Constitution. It is our duty.
Yes.
Those that have at least taken the oath, it's their duty to do something about it. Am I right or wrong?
You're more than right, and I'm more than happy to give you what's his name, Holder's email address. You can send him a nice email. I think.
You know what? I wouldn't wipe my feet on that skull.
Unfortunately, I think there's a great deal of looking the other way going on by members of this administration that should be protecting us, should be defending us, should be thanking Arizona and Alabama rather than suing them.
Yes.
Can I get an amen on that?
Amen. Amen.
Yes, ma'am.
You talk about our president having declared this is no longer a Christian nation. There you go. It's all different. And the other question is, you've not talked specifically about taqiyya.
About what?
Taqiyya. But that principle, I believe, is where a Muslim is justified in lying to an infidel
Yes.
to further Sharia law or whatever.
Yes.
So, you know, in the whole justice system, or you get one of them on television, you know, being interviewed, they have no compunction about lying because it's in the Quran, it's part of their philosophy. So to further their purposes, you can lie.
That's why, one of the reasons why Sharia and Constitution cannot get along, because there's a separation between individuals. Not only between male and female, but between various religious belief systems. Islam sees non-Muslims as a different class. Therefore, different laws apply. Islam, Sharia laws apply from Muslim to Muslim. But if you're a non-Muslim, you're seen as a second, third, or lower grade individual. People of the book, Christians and Jews, are seen a little higher than Indians and Hindus and things of such. Yes, sir.
Because slavery is legal in Saudi Arabia, could you comment, is it with Sharia law or against Sharia law or the Quran? How does that slavery fit into the Quran or Sharia law, into the Sharia law? Also, to how one become a slave. As I saw it, like Filipino girls would come from the Philippines, go there to work for a prince, they take their passport, and make them a slave, and the kids would be in the orphanage.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
From what I have read, and I'm not extensively read on the topic, but from what I have read on that particular topic, is that often the victims of that slavery movement are non-Muslims. They have to be non-Muslims. Again, that goes to reinforce the multi-class system of Sharia. If it's a non-Muslim, then it is seen as more acceptable. They are bought, quote, and paid for. They are property. You know, this is 2012, but we're still having conversations similar. My God, we're talking about pirates off the coast of Africa. So yeah, it is quite amazing. We're still using words such as slavery, such as pirates in 2012. But yeah, generally because there's a separation of classes of various groups.
I have no regard for the UN. So my question to you is, how are the principles of Islam and Sharia law getting away with violating human rights relative to the UN? Why aren't they coming down on them for the way they're treating their people?
Yeah, I think there's 20, can't remember the number, but it's in the 20s number of Muslim countries in the world. So they do hold a large number of vote and a voting bloc. They're also a large populace numbers-wise. They're a decent number of individuals. So they do have voting power.
Didn't the UN just, not too long ago, reprimand the United States on human rights?
Yes.
So why aren't they reprimanding these other countries?
Why did the UN reprimand the United States? You remember? Because our president took the case to the United Nations.
Yes.
Is that true, or did I just make that up?
No.
It's true. Our president actually took a complaint of our own case over to the United Nations and had them stand judge of us. Before I go on to my political speech, will there be any questions on Sharia and Islam? Yes, ma'am.
I want to get this straight. You're saying
Good luck.
that
I want to get it straight.
Muhammad did not write the entire Quran?
Muhammad gave a verbal dictation of history and what he saw. He believed he was visited by the angel Gabriel, and he believed that what he saw, what he heard, he gave it an oral history.
Okay, so
after his death, that oral history was put into writing.
So all of these Sharia laws we could find in the Quran?
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't there evidence to suggest that Muhammad was illiterate?
It wouldn't be unusual for his time for him to have been illiterate, yes. I don't know the fact 100%, but it wouldn't be unusual. But that writing had come after his death.
Did Muhammad write the Sharia law?
They all were written after his death, but as of his teaching.
Yeah, after his death. Then his predecessors, they wrote it.
Yes, ma'am.
And now they say he did.
Well, it's based on his oral history to them. That's how they're saying he did it. They believe that it was actually given to him by God through the angel Gabriel. He told you, and then you wrote it, therefore I'm the one that wrote it, in essence, is how they would translate.
Well, it's a bunch of hearsay.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, there's a There's a law in the Quran that says there's no son of God. And that is our big problem.
But there's no son of God.
That there's no son of God. And because Christians and Jews, some of the Jews are blinded to know that the Old Testament says Jesus is the Son of God. It's in Hosea chapter 1, in Proverbs 30, verse 4. So some of the Jews will argue that there's no Son of God. But we are sons of God that believe in Jesus. And they want to kill us because of that law.
Well, they wouldn't kill you if you convert.
Well, if you convert, then you don't belong to Jesus.
That's right.
You don't want to do that.
Yes, sir.
Could you comment on the Mahdi and the coming of the Mahdi this year and the cleansing of the world in blood?
Yeah, there's a sect of Islam that is something what we may have in our Christian / Judeo background. It's like messianic. That there's a particular prophet coming to save the Muslims of the world. And in order to do so, certain elements have to be present in the world. So some Muslims, including Ahmadinejad of Iran, wants to create that environment of war and conflict and chaos in order to bring about that prophet, in order to bring those end days over, in order to bring Armageddon. He wants to... Sorry?
The last count.
The last count. Okay, I'm going to take off my hat.